Your grocery bill isn't higher because food costs more. Your rent isn't doubling because landlords got greedy. Your energy bill isn't surging because companies suddenly decided to price gouge. These aren't accidents, they're design. The cost of living crisis isn't a crisis. It's not a temporary shock. It's not even about inflation. It's a wealth extraction mechanism that's been perfected over a century, and in 2022, it went into overdrive. Between 2021 and 2024, global consumer prices rose 28% in 3 years. It previously took 13 years for prices to rise by that amount. Think about that. A decade of price increases compressed into 36 months. In the UK alone, 4.3 million households to 75% of the bottom income bracket went without essentials in 2023. Food, heat, medicine. In the United States, it now takes $119.27 to buy what costs $100 in 2020. Groceries up 25%, electricity up 25%, used cars up 35%, auto insurance up 33%, rents up 20%. 3 out of 4 people globally worried about affording daily expenses in 2023. That's 5.6 billion humans facing the same squeeze simultaneously. But here's what they don't tell you. This has happened before. Same pattern, same players, same playbook. And when it happened in 1923 Germany and 1970s America, it didn't just crush wealth, it destroyed democracies. To understand what's happening today, we need to go back to November 1923, Weimar Germany. A wheelbarrow full of money couldn't buy a newspaper. A cup of coffee ordered at 5,000 marks came back priced at 7,000 before you finished drinking it. By November 1923, $1 equaled 1 trillion marks. Not million, not billion, trillion. Shopkeepers couldn't restock fast enough. Farmers refused to sell food for worthless paper. Pensioners starved. Townspeople marched into countryside to loot farms. What caused it? War debt, reparation payments, and a government that chose the printing press over hard choices. But here's the part they never teach. Hyperinflation didn't bring Hitler to power. That's a myth. It was what came after the deflation and unemployment of 1930 to 1933 that destroyed Weimar democracy. Fast forward to 1973 America. The land of plenty suddenly wasn't so plentiful. October 19, 1973, OPEC imposed an oil embargo. Within days, oil prices quadrupled from $3 to $12 per barrel. Gas stations ran dry. Lines stretched for miles. Gas shortage to 10 gallons max per customer signs appeared nationwide. But the oil crisis was just the spark. The real fire, stagflation. A word that shouldn't exist according to economic theory. Unemployment and inflation rising together. The impossible combination. Between 1973 and 1975, US GDP fell 3.2%. Unemployment hit 9% by May 1975. Inflation surged past 12%. The misery index, unemployment plus inflation, hit 20% by 1980. 20%, same pattern in the UK. GDP dropped 3.9%, took 14 quarters to recover. What's the connection? Both crises shared 3 elements: external shocks, government printing money, and the normalization of financial pain. In Weimar, people adapted. They used barter. They hoarded goods. They invented new ways to survive the insanity. In the 1970s, Americans did the same. Whip inflation, now buttons, wage and price controls. None of it worked. Why? Because the problem wasn't too much demand or too little supply. It was the monetary system itself breaking down. And here's where it gets interesting. Both crises created a new normal. After Weimar, Germans became pathologically afraid of inflation. After the 1970s, Americans stopped expecting stable prices. The lesson was learned. When the system breaks, pain becomes permanent. Now let's talk about how it works today. Because the playbook didn't change, it evolved. The cost of living crisis of 2021 to 2024 has 3 architects: central banks, governments, and corporations. First, central banks printed money like never before. Between 2020 and 2022, global money supply exploded. The Federal Reserve's balance sheet quintupled in a decade. In the UK, the Bank of England's quantitative easing added £895 billion to the economy. That's $1.1 trillion in new money. The European Central Bank, Euro 4.9 trillion, Japan, 80 trillion yuan. Second, governments spent it: COVID relief, infrastructure subsidies. The US alone spent $5 trillion in pandemic relief. But here's the trick. When you create money without creating goods, prices must rise. Basic economics. Third, corporations raised prices far beyond their costs. In 2022 to 2023, corporate profit margins hit record highs even as they claimed inflation forced price increases. Who controls this game? 3 groups profit while everyone else pays. Financial institutions that hold assets, stocks, real estate, bonds saw values explode. If you owned assets in 2020, your wealth likely doubled by 2024. Large corporations with pricing power passed costs to consumers plus markup. Profit margins soared while they blamed supply chains. Government debt holders, mostly wealthy individuals and institutions, saw their debt eroded by inflation while their assets appreciated. Meanwhile, workers' real wages declined. In the UK, real household incomes in 2024 won't return to 2021 levels until 2027. In the US, interest payments on mortgages tripled. The payment on a new mortgage for an average house increased from $1,000 to $3,000 monthly. The consequences are mathematical. Inevitable. First, wealth transfers from those without assets to those with assets. If you own your home, you're okay. If you rent, you're being crushed. Second, the middle class becomes the working poor. A family earning $75,000 in 2024 has the purchasing power of $63,000 from 2020. Third, social mobility freezes. Young people can't afford homes, can't start businesses, can't take risks. The ladder gets pulled up. Fourth, political instability rises. When people can't afford food, they stop debating policy. They start burning things. Let's examine the evidence. 3 historical crises. Same pattern every time. Crisis 1, Weimar Germany, 1923, August 1921. Reichsbank President Rudolf Habenstein made a decision: buy foreign currency with German marks at any price. No limits. The goal: pay war reparations. The result: currency collapse. By July 1922, the mark had fallen from 320 to 7,400 per dollar. A 17-fold collapse in 6 months. Then it accelerated. November 1923, 1 trillion marks per dollar. Who profited? Speculators, industrialists, exporters. The connected elite who converted marks to hard assets before the collapse. Who lost everyone else? Pensioners saw life savings become worthless. Workers' wages couldn't buy bread. The middle class was annihilated. The human cost: food riots, farm raids, law and order collapsed. Democracy died. Crisis 2, 1970s America. The Great Inflation, 1973. Oil prices quadrupled in days. But that was just the trigger. The Federal Reserve had been running an accommodative monetary policy since the late 1960s. Money supply growing faster than economic output. When the oil shock hit, inflation was already simmering at 5.6%. The Fed's response: keep interest rates low to protect employment. It was orthodox Keynesian policy. The result: stagflation. By 1980, inflation hit 14.5%, unemployment 7.5%. The misery index reached 21. Who profited? Oil-producing states. Texas, Oklahoma, Louisiana boomed. Asset holders saw real estate and commodity prices surge. Who lost? Fixed income earners, savers, anyone living on yesterday's dollars. The political cost: Carter lost to Reagan in a landslide. Public confidence in government collapsed. Sound familiar? Crisis 3, 2008 financial crisis aftermath that nobody connects to today. After 2008, central banks globally launched unprecedented monetary expansion, quantitative easing, zero interest rates, asset purchases. The promise: stimulate economic growth, create jobs, avoid depression. The reality: asset prices inflated, real wages stagnated, wealth inequality exploded. By 2019, the top 1% in the US held more wealth than the bottom 90% combined. Then COVID hit. Governments printed more money in 2 years than in the previous decade combined. $5 trillion in US stimulus, £895 billion UK QE, 4.9 trillion euros ECB expansion. The result: we're living now. 2021 to 2024 cost of living crisis. Who's profiting? Same groups. Asset holders, large corporations, financial institutions. Who's losing? Same people: workers, renters, the young, the unconnected. Here's the connection: each crisis was solved by printing money, which created the conditions for the next crisis, each worse than the last. It's not a bug, it's how the system is designed. Here's the truth nobody wants to say out loud: the cost of living crisis isn't an accident. It's the system working exactly as designed. The trap is total. You can't save your way out because inflation destroys savings faster than you can accumulate them. You can't earn your way out because wages rise slower than prices by design. Between 2021 and 2024, real wages fell in 2/3 of OECD countries. You can't invest your way out unless you already have capital, the minimum viable investment in real estate. In most Western cities, $500,000 minimum for entry. Don't have $500,000, then you rent. And rental prices rose 20 to 30% since 2020. It's a closed loop, a poverty trap masquerading as a free market. But here's where it gets truly sinister. The pain is deliberate. Central banks openly state they need to cool the labor market. Translation: they need unemployment to rise to bring down wage demands to reduce inflation. The Bank of England's 2023 projections showed they expected 1.1 million more unemployed by Q1 2024 to control inflation. Think about that. The official policy is to destroy 1.1 million jobs to protect currency value. Who does that serve? Not the unemployed, not workers. It serves debt holders and asset owners who need stable currency values. The scale is global. 75% of consumers worldwide worried about daily expenses in 2023. That's 5.6 billion people. In Sudan, food prices rose 88% in 1 year during civil war. In Lebanon, inflation hit 170% in 2022 with GDP falling 40%. Venezuela, hyperinflation so extreme citizens abandoned their currency entirely for US dollars. But even in wealthy nations, the crisis is real. UK households won't recover to 2021 living standards until 2027. US real household income is down 8% from 2019 when adjusted for true cost of living. The uncomfortable truth: this isn't a crisis to be solved. It's a feature, not a bug. The system requires a class of people struggling to survive, to keep wages low, to keep labor cheap, to keep profits high. Some call it capitalism, others call it extraction. The name doesn't matter. The result is the same. So what do you do? What can anyone do? First, understand this isn't about your personal failings. You're not bad with money. The game is rigged. When a nurse in London can't afford a one-bedroom apartment on full-time salary, that's not personal failure. That's systemic extraction. When a teacher in Texas needs a second job to cover groceries, that's not poor budgeting. That's wage theft by inflation. Second, financial literacy isn't enough anymore. You need asset literacy. The rules changed. Income alone won't build wealth. You need assets that inflate with or faster than currency debasement. Real estate, stocks, Bitcoin, gold, anything scarce that holds value as currency degrades. But here's the catch-22. Acquiring assets requires capital most people don't have after paying for survival. Third, community becomes currency. When formal systems fail, informal networks survive. Skill sharing, bartering, mutual aid, time banks. History shows that when currencies collapse, communities that cooperate survive. Communities that fragment perish. Fourth, pressure for systemic change. This isn't fixed by individual action alone. The system is designed to extract, requires redesign. Higher wages indexed to real inflation. Rent controls, progressive taxation on wealth, not just income. Public ownership of essential resources. These aren't radical ideas. They're how wealthy nations operated during their most prosperous periods. Post-World War II, 1945 to 1970s, before the current system was imposed. Finally, knowledge is the only inflation-proof asset. Understanding how the system works, who profits, who loses, and why that knowledge can't be taxed, inflated away, or confiscated. You now understand what took economists decades to figure out. Cost of living crises aren't natural disasters. They're policy choices, and policy choices can be changed. The cost of living crisis will continue. Prices will keep rising. Wages will keep lagging. Assets will keep concentrating. Unless enough people understand the game. Unless enough people demand different rules. Unless enough people realize that the economy isn't a force of nature, it's a set of decisions made by people who benefit from current arrangements. You now know what most people will never learn. The crisis isn't about inflation. It's about power. Who has it? Who doesn't? Who wants to keep it that way? History doesn't repeat, but it rhymes. And right now we're hearing echoes of Weimar of the 1970s, of every moment when currency manipulation transferred wealth from many to few. The difference: now understand the pattern. And knowledge, as they say, is power. If this gave you a new perspective, click subscribe. The investment in knowledge pays the best interest.